Hi, I'm Hannah,
And I'm Lydia.
and we are a pair of bookends.
And we were just hoping that we could interrupt this episode to ask you very kindly if you would sign up to our Patreon.
Yes, if you have some spare change rattling around in your pocket, we would so appreciate it if you could go over to patreon.com/a pair of bookends where you can support our work. We have been doing this podcast for nearly 2 years now, and we wanted the opportunity to get to know some of you a little better. And via our Patreon, as well as getting exclusive benefits, you can also have the opportunity to share your own recommendations with us and to chat with us. And it's just a nice place for us to have our own little hub.
For less than a price of a coffee, you can get exclusive Patreon only benefits, such as our Patreon exclusive book club, where you get to pick the book that we read each month, and also
Early access to all podcast episodes.
and your chance to ask our authors your own questions.
So please do, if you can, sign up to our Patreon via patreon.com/a pair of bookends and support our work. We would appreciate it more than you can imagine, and it helps us hugely to bring you all the extra special stuff.
So come and officially become a bookend.
Now on to today's episode. Hello and welcome to our book club episode for April. This month we have chosen A Lesson in Cruelty by Harriet Tyce. We follow three women. Anna, who wants a fresh start after 3 years behind bars but doesn't believe she deserves it. Lucy, a young student eager to gain the attention of her married Oxford professor. And Marie, a recluse who has been locked away for a long time and isn't quite ready to be free. For these women, mistakes are made, regrets are held, but above all else, there are lessons to be learned. A chilling and suspenseful psychological thriller. We hope this one kept you up at night as much as it did for us. Harriet Tyce is a novelist based in London. Born and raised in Edinburgh, Harriet then went on to study English at Oxford University, followed by a law conversion course at City University. She then practiced as a criminal barrister in London for nearly a decade, and as described by Harriet herself, having escaped law and early motherhood, she then began writing and completed an MA in creative writing crime fiction at the University of East Anglia. Harriet is the author of 4 novels. Her debut novel, Blood Orange, was published in 2019 and became a huge hit both online and amongst critics. Her second and third novels, The Lies You Told, published in 2020, and It Ends at Midnight, published in 2022, were Sunday Times bestsellers, and her latest novel, A Lesson in Cruelty, was published earlier this month by Wildfire and was described by Lisa Jewell as Harriet's darkest book yet. I'm thrilled to have Harriet join me today. Welcome to A Pair of Bookends.
Hi, thank you for having me.
No, thank you for coming on. I read Blood Orange when it first came out, and I remember the hype around it, and I remember seeing it everywhere online at the time. And that was the thing that made me buy it. I was like, okay, like I feel left out here. I want to know what everybody's raving about. And I remember just being absolutely obsessed because the thing is, I'm not a massive thriller reader. So I just felt completely sucked in, wasn't sure what to expect, but I thought I'll let you take me wherever you're going to take me. And oh my God, I was absolutely obsessed with it. I remember like staying up until like ridiculous o'clock just to finish it. And I felt very similarly with this book. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you manage to weave all these characters' stories together, how you manage to pull out these twists. I don't understand it. When you published Blood Orange, were you expecting your books to go as crazy as they have done?
No, no, not at all. I mean, absolutely not. After I started writing, my once I'd sort of got past just it being a bit of a hobby, when I was actually starting to think, what, I'd like to do something with this. It would be amazing to be taken more seriously. For me at that point, the one thing I was thinking was that I would like an agent because it was this sort of this massive goal. And I think that every aspiring writer would say this, that the goal of getting an agent is absolutely huge. I didn't really think about what would happen after that. That was for another day. Publication was such a pipe dream that the agent was the first step and the only sort of tangible step that I could see. And I had a lot of rejections in the run-up, not through writing Blood Orange, but in a book that I wrote before that has never been and will never be published because it's terrible. But that I got rejected by a lot of agents. really. And that was before I started the MA. And then when I started the MA, I started writing Blood Orange. And within a year, I had been signed by my agent on the basis of 10,000 words and a synopsis, which was an amazing thing. And I finished it quite fast with this sort of real sense of urgency. I don't know quite where that came from, but I had a feeling that this was an opportunity I had to just push for, and I had to make sure that I got it done. And I signed with Veronique in November of 2016, and then the book was finished and went out on submission at the beginning of May 2017, and that was when it was signed, and it was taken on by Wildfire at Headline, who are the imprint who published me. And it was also quick in a way, it had been very, very slow, and suddenly it was really quick. So I didn't really have much time to think about what any of it meant, except for the fact that it was an extraordinary opportunity. And then I got caught up almost immediately in having to write the next book, because it was a 2-book deal, and you have to keep on writing. And I found that really difficult, just because Blood Orange had come kind of quite easily, and I was doing it in the MA, and it was fun, and it was all a very supportive atmosphere. And suddenly sort of operating in a world where I thought people were going to read something I was writing. Before, I'd written for an audience of about 12, and then it was that there would be more people. And so I was much more focused on that, and it being a bit of a disaster, and how was I going to make it work. And so the publication of Blood Orange was, it was amazing, and it was all very exciting, because I got lots of foreign deals. I think that I got about, I can't remember how many, I think we're up to about 27 or something. But it in the first few weeks after the book was signed, it was sort of bang, 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 country after country. But yeah, that was all massive enough, that was enough. That was amazing enough. And 2019 was when the hardback came out, and it wasn't a bestseller. It was doing very well. It was, that people were talking about it. I was being reviewed, but it was respectable, shall we say. What happened in 2020 was kind of beyond any kind of reckoning. I could never have anticipated the fact that it would go quite as, I remember that point. And it wasn't just online, it wasn't just on digital that it was going crazy. It went crazy in paperback as well. And there was this period of time when it was just, I seemed to see it all the time on Instagram. And it was, and a lot of people, if you already say people were raving about it, a lot of people hated it as well. And they hated Alison, the main character. And I think because it had this Marmite effect, maybe that's what drew people in, because then they could argue about it. But no, it was, I hate to say lockdown was good to me, but, lockdown was because everybody was stuck at home, and
Totally.
people had time to read, and the book had visibility at that moment. So yeah, I don't think I could have asked for a better launch to my debut. It was an amazing thing.
Completely. And I find it so interesting that you said about people hated it as well, especially hating on Alison, because I remember being so frustrated with that character, but I also really enjoyed reading from her perspective. And I think you write complex women so well, like you really flesh them out. And I don't want to read about perfect women, because I don't know any perfect women. I want to read people that I want to read flaws, and it's more interesting to me. So I absolutely hoovered up that character.
It's very funny, because so many people, if I don't look at my Amazon reviews now, but if you actually look at them, it's really funny, because there are so many people saying, why is she drinking so much? And I'm like, because if she put her glass down at the end of chapter 1, when she says, I'm only having one, that would have been the end of the book. What would be the point if she had been sensible? There would be no story.
Yeah.
You can't write crime thrillers, you can't write psychological thrillers about flawless people, because then actually, well, you just want to watch them being killed, don't you, if they're flawless? Personally, I do anyway, because they wind me up.
Yeah.
But I think, I would always try and have people being real, because she's neither good nor bad. She's a mix of, as we all are, a mix of everything.
Yeah, I am already wanting to chat about numerous different things on this topic, but I've just realised that I didn't even start off with our usual beginning question. So our listeners will be very annoyed with me if I don't ask you this.
Oh, no, sorry.
So what are you currently reading, Harriet?
Well, I'm currently right now I'm reading a non-fiction book called Outlived by Dr. Peter Attia, which is all about being healthy for longevity. And I want to find out what the magic supplements and exercise formula are for. It's all very dull, but I think I turned 50 recently, so I'm sort of mildly obsessed about all of that kind of thing. I'm doing Couch to 5K and that stop drinking. Anyway, it's all very
Amazing.
boring. Though it does seem to be quite an interesting book. So if anyone is interested on being a little bit more healthy, looks like it's going to be good. The fiction book I've just finished I've read an advanced copy. It's going to be out in June, but it's Chris Whitaker's All the Colours of the Dark, which is, I don't know if you read his last one. Have you any Chris Whitaker? Read Chris Whitaker. He's very, very good. Now,
I'll note
he
him
does
down.
likable characters. He does likable, heartbreaking. Oh my God, it's going to destroy you. He knows how to get every ounce of emotion out of everything. And this is a sort of a sweeping great. It's a serial killer thriller and a love story and a coming of age, sweeping across America with art and paint and color. And yeah, I was totally caught up in it. And it's not out for a bit, but I would strongly recommend it. I really enjoyed reading it.
I will definitely be adding that to my wish list. Yeah, you've completely sold me on him. Congratulations on turning 50 as well. That's
Oh,
very,
thank you.
very
Thank
exciting.
you.
How are you feeling now that you're 50? Like,
Well, I think, because I have stopped drinking and I'm doing the Couch to 5K a lot better than I did in my 40s. It's a bit of you sort of look at yourself in the mirror and think, oh, eye bags, I look so tired. But, it's fine. I'm now can run for 8-minute stretches. And so I'm feeling very proud
amazing.
of myself about that.
I love that. Do you think that now you're 50, do you think that you want to kind of slow down with like your career, or are you like raring to go? Like what
No, I've
you're
only just got started. No, 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 no. Because I was only published 5 years ago.
Yeah,
I think that if I'd stayed as a barrister, I would definitely be thinking, you know what, I've been doing this 25 years. That's quite a lot. Because I've had this amazing opportunity to have a second career. And I should say I'm 51, just in case anyone's looking it up. But it's been a sort of a journey since 50. That it's an extraordinary opportunity to start out now. It's a point because my kids are, my second child's going to be leaving home in the next couple of years, and rather than worrying about empty nest and what am I going to do, I'm actually, I'm starting writing my next book. I'm dealing with the publication of this. I get to do podcasts like this. I feel very full of beans, which is one of the reasons why I'm trying to sort of take slightly better care of myself, because I'd quite like to have the energy to be able to
totally.
keep going and keep my brain going.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that wasn't offensive in any way, me asking that. I
No,
just
God,
think
no.
it's
No, not at all. Not at all.
I'm 29 now, and I'm always curious
Oh,
about the
sweetie.
I'm just a
Oh.
baby. But I just wonder, because I've definitely felt throughout my 20s, like the pressures of I'm an actor, and obviously I do the podcast and things like that. So I've felt a lot of pressure to be like, go, 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 and feeling like I need to achieve everything, and like I'm kind of on this like life treadmill. And I kind of was curious, if that I was hopeful you were going to say, no, 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 that stops once you get to this age. But
It changes, though. It changes because I think what you've realised is that what I suppose for me, what I thought I wanted was not, in terms of being a successful barrister, I was a terrible barrister. I mean, I was absolutely appalling. I got drunk all the time. I mean, not in court, but, Alison is not totally dissimilar to me. And it was very frustrating when I gave up that career because I had kids, and it's not something, if you're the primary carer for children, it's not a job that you can do part time. And I wanted to work part time. And I spent, some time in my 30s thinking, well, this is all very well, but I did all that training, I've done all that work experience, and now I'm just the person who knows where the pants are. I go to the shops, I take the kids to play. Oh, it was dismal. I mean, it's lovely, but also really not quite. And it felt like such a waste. And the fact that I've been able to repurpose it later on is an amazing thing. And I suppose it's, I mean, if there is any wisdom I can give with age, nothing's wasted. And also, you know, things have a way of working out, even if it's not exactly in the way that you thought it would be at the time. So I just feel very excited about still having something to do, you know,
As
and
you
not being
should.
bored.
Yeah, totally. So I did want to ask about your career trajectory because obviously you studied English at Oxford, but then you went on to do the law conversion course and then you had this career in as a barrister and then you started writing much later. But why do you think that you changed direction from English into law and then back again? Like, and what was the kind of moment where you were like, no, I want to write now?
I think it was panic about what I would do with an English degree. And this was back in 1994. 1993, I think, was when I was making the decision. And there was a careers service, and I'm sure it was a very good one if I had bothered to go and avail myself of it. But nothing like the internet is now, nothing like, you know, Twitter tells you everything, or, you know, Instagram, or all of the different resources. But I think that now you can actually find out about things much more easily in terms of, because you can literally Google, how would I get into publishing, or how would I, you know, all of the different things. I mean, I limited myself with my own imagination, and I thought with an English degree I could be a journalist or a teacher, and I couldn't really think what else I'd do with it, which is so stupid because I'd spent years, you know, reading, and obviously publishing would have been that. If I have any regrets, it's that I didn't go into publishing. I think I would have loved that. But I mean, I'm very happy with where I am now, but I do think I could see me as a sort of grande dame of literary agents, you know, in a caftan with a cigarette holder. But I'd probably, you know, dead at 55 of Negroni-induced poisoning. But no, I couldn't really think what to do. And I knew I needed to do something. And the thing was that my father was a Scottish advocate. So I had seen him being, you know, I'd seen him being a lawyer. And it seemed like an interesting job and one that he obviously enjoyed. And so, you know, I sort of tried not to do exactly the same. So I didn't stay in Edinburgh. You know, I moved down to London instead to try the English bar. And really, it was it wasn't a total disaster, but it was a disaster. I mean, I was not suited to the environment particularly, and I found it very, very stressful. And at the time, I used to get very bad stage fright before appearing in court. I'd get so nervous that I was just living on nerves and Stella and black coffee and crisps. You know, it wasn't a very healthy existence. And there was a lot of aggression within it too, because it's so high stakes, because doing criminal defence work, of course, you know, people are facing the possibility of loss of reputation, loss of employment, loss of liberty. You know, it's all deeply difficult. And I don't know, I don't at all regret having done it. I mean, as I say, firstly, nothing's wasted. And secondly, I think that having had legal training, it has given me a certain incisiveness of thought and an ability to summarize things in my head. And also, I'm not scared of threatening to sue people if I need to. You know, I write very aggressive emails if I feel that people owe me money and that kind of thing, which isn't, I know doesn't sound great, but actually I think it is a good thing to remember, that you don't always have to roll over if people are being unpleasant, that you can fight back and that there are ways of doing it legally.
Totally.
And so those were all very good skills to develop. But I think really, I mean, I had written poetry when I was at school, you know, not aggressive, quite sort of mournful, very self-indulgent poetry. And some of it was all right, I guess. But my English teacher didn't put something in the school magazine. And I said, why not? And he said it was too self-indulgent. And that crushed me. You know, he was absolutely right. I just discovered Sylvia Plath, and I was doing like really bad Plath knockoff, like, oh, misery, oh, bah, misery. And but it crushed me. I couldn't write poetry again for a very long time. And then I didn't really think of, I know this will sound stupid, but I didn't know how to write things on the page. I didn't know how to write speech. And I know that I could have just looked at it and then transferred what I was looking at in a book onto the page, but I couldn't make that work. There was just something in my head that couldn't make that step. I think because I was scared, really, if I'm honest about it, that it felt too difficult. And then I think I must have been in my late 30s, and a friend of mine told me that he had just got a place to do an MA in creative writing at Royal Holloway, and he had done English with me. And it was weird because I felt really cross. And I thought afterwards, well, that's such a strange reaction. Why on earth am I cross? It's fantastic. Lucky him. And then I thought, lucky him. Yeah, that's the issue, isn't it? I want to do this. And I feel angry, not with him, but with myself for the fact that I haven't, I don't have 5,000 words that I can put into the application. I've got no idea how to put any, what do I do? But at least that sort of showed me that I was interested. And then I found an evening course, which I turned up to. And that, you started by writing a sentence and then a paragraph and then a page and then a short story. And it sort of built on from there, really. And I think it was quite soon into it, probably only about 6 months into it, that I realised that it was something that I was serious about wanting. As I said at the beginning, I wanted to be taken seriously when I was doing it. And I felt that if I was able to say to people, I've got an agent, then people would take it seriously. It never occurred to me that I'd be able to say I'm published. That just didn't come into my mind.
I mean, firstly, I need to rewind back to something you said a few minutes ago about how you envisioned yourself in the publishing world, because I feel like that needs to be a future character in one of your books. I would like to read that very much. And I could fully envision this character when you said it. And secondly, I wanted to say, obviously, you've said a couple of times now, like, nothing is ever wasted. Your novels all sit in the crime thriller genre. Has this always been your favourite genre to read, or do you think this inspiration to write in this genre has sort of stemmed from your career in law, I should say?
I think it's a combination of both. I mean, as most crime writers would say, I first was introduced to crime via the books of Agatha Christie at about the age of 11. I think that there's just about everyone would say that. And then I moved on to Dorothy Sayers and Golden Age crime. And then I think it was the novels of Patricia Cornwell were the first slightly more, should we say, harder core contemporary, that was Kay Scarpetta and the serial killing and then there was a whole slew, and this was back in sort of 92, 93. There was a whole slew of sort of female detectives and female PIs and people really trying to, female authors really trying to break through into what had been, I know I've sort of said Agatha Christie and Dorothy Sayers, but in terms of the detectives, they were sort of primarily a lot more, there was Ian Rankin and Rebus and Peter James. And yes, I mean, that was mostly what I read, though I read a lot of other things too. I mean, I did the full English degree, which was sort of the classics of literature up to 1950. And I read around that a lot. I loved the books of Georgette Hare. I loved Ginny Cooper, all sorts of that. But I think, though, that the reason I ended up in crime, in criminal law, was because I had actually started in commercial law, and I found the only thing I was interested in that was when it was a personal injury case, and it was those people who say they were really injured, but then they get followed, and it turns out that they're salsa dancing at the weekend. And so you've got these private detective giving reports so that people would not end up being given any money. And so that, I thought, that's interesting. But the rest was dull as ditch water. And it was the stories that came through from, when you're doing crime, even though someone's just being arrested for stealing, very little from a supermarket, that the backstory to that and why someone has found themselves in that position it's absolutely fascinating. And I mean, and usually very sad as well. But the stories around it are, you see people in their most vulnerable, at their most extreme of emotional state. As I said, it's a very aggressive and difficult environment. And so I think that was why I've always found crime as an area such an interesting subject and a route into exploring human nature. Because, I mean, if things are going well, it's not terribly interesting because, we all know what we need to have a kind of a nice, normal, happy life. It's a routine. routine. It's a regular getting up in the morning. It's a regular bedtime. It's taking enough exercise. It's avoiding too many extremes. And I mean, bluntly, I don't know that you want to read about that particularly.
Yeah.
Not maybe occasionally, but you do also want something with perhaps a little bit more adrenaline, or perhaps that's going to make you think a bit more. And so, yeah, that's, I think, really how it ended up. But also, and I mean, this I couldn't help. It's just anytime I write anything, it just goes nasty. And that is instinctive. And I don't mean it to. And I think if I tried to write a love story, it would go really, really nasty as well. And, everyone
I
would
think that'd
end
be
up
interesting.
dead. I should set myself the challenge sometime. I think it would be, but I know it would just turn into a psych thriller, whatever I did. So,
I mean, a love story where everyone ends up dead, I would definitely read that. Now, we should probably speak about the book itself because I mean, I do have questions about my reading of this genre is quite limited, so I'm going to get some recommendations out of you at the end. But your book, we first meet the character Anna whilst she's at the end of her prison sentence, and throughout the book, we consistently see her struggles with what she did to end up behind bars. What did your experience of working as a barrister teach you about criminals, and how did you want them to be represented on the page?
As I say, even if it was for a shoplift, the backstory is usually completely tragic. Not always, and not in every respect, but the common theme, the most common theme that I found behind the backgrounds really of just about all of my clients was one of deprivation and what growing up in a difficult environment can do to a person in terms of, if and I know that that's not an excuse because everyone has agency, but I also think that, I mean, people don't end up in addiction because they're happy. People don't end up on drugs because life's going well. Generally, it's because they're trying to escape from something. And if they have grown up, without a dad, in poverty, with emotionally deprived, it's not really likely to end well. And it's not very surprising that, if you live in a cycle of violence, that you end up perpetuating that violence going onwards. I mean, Anna is a slightly different kettle of fish because she is, she has, on a material basis at least, had every privilege. But she is also someone who, through her own choices, ended up under too much pressure and made, a very, very, very bad decision, which leads to a very difficult outcome. And I think that the view overall I would have is that I wouldn't like to be judged on the worst decision I ever made. I think that I would like to be seen as a whole rather than as just the person who did that. And I think it's in a context of society where we can be very, hang and flog them. It is a very punitive idea. We should just lock people up for having done something wrong and throw away the key. And that, I can see why that desire for vengeance is there, but I'm not sure that it's necessarily terribly constructive. And I don't know that it's, I think that I was perhaps trying to look at the humanity behind, because everyone is fundamentally a human being. And as I say, we wouldn't, I think any of us wish to be judged on our worst mistake.
No, I think it's really interesting as well that from, like you said, from a material perspective, like Anna kind of had a decent life before she was in prison and she had those privileges. And there's a really moving moment in the book where she's kind of observing the women in the hostel and she talks about them and she says these women brought together by poverty and addiction. And I think it was so interesting to see the parallels that you kind of drew out throughout the book. And I don't even know if this was a conscious thing that you realised you were doing, but like Edgar and his wife, they have quite a nice life for themselves. Anna obviously does have her privileges, but then there are people in the book, and I'm really scared about giving any spoilers away, but there are other characters in the book that don't have those privileges and don't come from those backgrounds. Was it a conscious thing for you to be drawing these parallels?
Well, I think that, not that I am saying that anyone should be restricted only to writing about the sort of person they are.
Mm-hmm.
But that I find, for me, in order for me to write in a way that is authentic, the characters that I write most about tend to need to be not dissimilar to my background, because that's something I know that I can present in a realistic way. And
Mm-hmm.
my background is one of privilege, and I'm middle class, middle-aged woman, so those do tend to be the characters who are foregrounded in my books. But I'm also very keen, as much as possible, to try and show a society that is reflective of what reality is,
Mm-hmm.
which is that there are, it's complete multi-strata. I don't write sort of resort thrillers or destination thrillers where we end up in a beautiful hotel, and I mean, they're great, but that's just not what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's impossible to write about the criminal justice system from a purely middle class perspective, just because the realities of it are that most people who are drawn into lives of crime, so to speak, have been pulled into it because of the deprivation in which they are. And I mean, I have to say that I feel a lot more kindly towards those than I do towards, that I can't judge people at all for joining gangs if that seems to be the only route forward for them to get themselves out of the situation they're in. I do judge, however, sort of middle class kids who've got every opportunity, who decide then to go and be fake roadmen and shoplift or whatever it is they're doing. I judge them really, really harshly. And I think there is absolutely, I mean, and there's generally something else going on, I know, but I think that there's a lot less excuse for it, that you have to look at it as a whole. So I mean, I think it's something that authors need to be very sensitive about how they approach characters, well, from any background, that you have to sort of think about it, and you have to work out how best to do it, or at least do your best to do justice to people. And I mean, I'm glad that you think I have. I certainly was trying to, because as I say, I did want to make sure that I gave a three-dimensional impression of what the situation was, and that prison isn't just sort of posh women going, oh dear, this isn't very nice.
No, I think it's you've obviously got that empathy, and I really liked the way you just described it then, that people don't just make those choices because they fancy committing a crime. Like, it is 9 times out of 10 led by, what, like you said, deprivation. And I think it's important that people recognize that. So I really like that you've just described it in that way, because I don't think I'd have been able to articulate it like that, but you're the writer, so there we go. But I also loved that you said that you're not a destination or resort thriller writer. And I think I've got an idea of what that means. But like I said, I don't read the genre often, but there is a particular setting in the book that your chapters go between different characters and different stories and where they are. And I'm going to be really careful to describe this, but there is a setting in the book, and it's quite a remote setting. And I felt really drawn to reading about this place because it sounded so dystopian, and we don't actually know where we are and what is happening. We just know that there are people living here and there's some kind of surveillance situation going on when we first get into it. And I think I can say that much without giving away anything. I hope that's okay. But what inspired...
Yeah.
Okay, good. What inspired that?
I mean, the original inspiration was that when I was at school, we did a hiking expedition up in the north of Scotland in this area called the Great Wilderness. And it started in Pool U, and we walked from Pool U over a number of Munros, including Anchallach, Ben Alligan and Anchallach. And then we ended up the other side in a village called Dundonald. And we spent 2 nights in bothies on the way. And one of the bothies was what looked like this house, this sort of, 2 up, 2 down house with a door in the middle called Chenaval. And it may be that I'm confusing my memories of it, but I looked it up recently because it was an amazing trip. It was very, very beautiful. And it just was coming into my head. I just kept thinking about something happening there. And that's it. I had been there. It was lovely. And I wanted to write about it. I think that the other thing actually was that I read something called The Diary of a Secret Prison Governor, which was about as far from Adrian Mole as you can imagine. It was much, much harder core. But he talks, or she talks at one point about experimental justice approaches and going somewhere in the middle of Europe to a forest inside a prison grounds where there was a prison within a prison. And it just, the two things sort of melded into my mind, and then I made this up, but I don't know where it came from. I mean, I know that's where it came from, but I don't know how it was that these things sort of mashed up to become those passages. I mean, it was almost like automatic writing. I wasn't thinking when I was writing them. I was just suddenly like, oh, there's a thing, and then there's this, and I really enjoyed them, actually. I really enjoyed writing them. And it's funny because there was a review, I've just read a review which says that they sort of stretch plausibility a bit, which, I mean, I think they do, because it's obviously made up, but also it's, I mean, but in a way though, it didn't feel totally, I'm not saying at all it was supernatural, but it did feel slightly otherworldly in the sense that it was this place. I mean, it's interesting you used the word dystopia, but exactly that it was a sort of almost alternative reality, though it isn't. And I'm not, please don't anyone go away with the idea that I'm saying that this is at all a sort of a sci-fi or you know, is very, very solidly grounded in slightly implausible psychological thriller reality. But I did find them fun to do. You know, there was something slightly sentimental about it. It's the best way I can put it.
No, I can totally see that, and I found it really exciting to read because it is this really mysterious setting, and we don't kind of know what's happening with these characters. We don't know why there's surveillance going on or who it is that's kind of watching over them. So it was really exciting to read. But I think it's quite cool that, you know, you just said that it's not sci-fi, but I always think it's quite cool when a writer plays with the genre that they're in, and I feel like that's what you've kind of done here, which is what makes it so exciting.
Brilliant, thank you, I'll take that.
Now I'm going to ask a question about your writing process, because as I've said, you know, you weave these characters' stories together, and you've got three main characters, but then you've got lots of side characters, and you also write twists really well. And I'm always like thrown. I'm like, how has somebody done this to me? Like, how have I not figured this out? I get so annoyed. But how do you go about plotting these things out?
I have to be honest, this one wasn't plotted at all, and
it's just instinctive.
A lot. It was editing. The reason it came together is because it was edited. I had to do 3 massive structural edits, which is where you sort of you really cut and you move things around. But I think that the driving force I had, that the first idea came from my editor. I was thinking I should do something to do with law again, because I tried something that was non-law and it hadn't worked. And so I was thinking, well, maybe something to do with law, I don't know. And then Jack, my editor, said Shawshank Redemption, but women. And that wasn't, I mean, obviously it isn't Shawshank Redemption, but it did make me think about women's prisons. And when you think about women's prisons, then it sort of, you know, fairly quickly takes you in the direction that the opening scenes go in. And I'd written about 8 chapters of that, of Anna's sort of what happens to her at the beginning and in the prison and afterwards. And then I was reading this Diary of the Secret Prison Governor, and he talks about this prison within a prison, and I went, oh. And then the Scottish Highlands came in, and so I did that. And I think though that there was a fundamental driving force, which was that, and I'm back to talking about Amazon reviews again. When I get these reviews saying I guessed it on page 55, I knew on page 73, and I mean, yeah, probably people do, and that's fine, but I did want to just see if I could. Yeah, you're not going to get this, mate, you know, go on, give it a go.
Well, I didn't.
And I mean, but primarily people won't get it just because it's, you know, I'm cheating, because I'm not withholding, but because it's 3 completely different perspectives, and the question is, how do they tie together, and what on earth is this all about? So, you know, in a way, the mystery is created by the fact that it's inconvenient complete what you're being told. But that was fun to do. But it was, I think Jack was also very responsible for making it work coherently and toning down some of the slightly madder stuff that was going on. I think that he felt that it was a bit too woo in bits, because I think I'd had quite a bit where food was just sort of miraculously appearing, and she kept thinking about the little people, which I mean not sort of fairies per se, not as in flat twee, but sort of slightly malevolent forces that work in the... Anyway, Jack was having none of that, so I think he was right, to be honest. I do think he was right.
I actually really I love reading authors' acknowledgements page. It's like one of my favourite things about a book, and I hope that's not insulting, because I did really enjoy the book itself, but I always find it so exciting to read about like how the book has come together and the people that have sort of influenced it. So I did love that Jack had said Shawshank Redemption but women, and all the other things that people had said to you as well. Now, I really want to ask about, I love reading about power dynamics in relationships, and there is a relationship in the book between a teacher and a student. So it's Lucy that's the student, and then we have Edgar, who's the Oxford professor, and he's married. Now, what inspired this sort of play with the power dynamics?
Well, I think academia is absolutely fraught with professors behaving badly and getting away with it, because they have tenure, and if they're doing well and they're bringing in the research grants, or they're bringing in the positive reviews, then they're effectively, they're untouchable. And so students or other members of staff might make complaints against them, but they're never going to be upheld, because the university doesn't want to disrupt the status quo and get rid of what they see as the golden egg. So, everyone else around them who's in a less powerful position ends up being expendable. So that was essentially what I was thinking about.
I mean, it's not just...
I'm probably being...
Sorry, go on.
It's not just... You're right. It's not just in academia. It is something that happens. I mean, I appreciate that what I'm talking about is, the power dynamic of sex and inappropriate sexual relationships. But I was thinking, I suppose, more about bullying, really, because I think that bullying within the workplace is something that I think is pernicious, and people get away with it all the time. But I don't think bullying is necessarily as sexy to read about as a terribly, terribly, terribly good-looking professor who can't help it. He's just drawn that way. And people who just throw... I find it a mildly... I apologise to all criminology professors out there. I have not meant to paint them in such a terrible way. But
what do you think that what do you think the actual allure is about Edgar? Because it's not just Lucy that's attracted to him. There are like multiple women that have kind of been in his orbit. So like, yes, he's good looking, but what do you think it is about him?
Oh, because I think there are these men who have a huge amount of charisma. We all... he's a bit Patrick from Blood Orange adjacent.
Yes.
That we've all had a Patrick at some point. And if we're unfortunate, we've all had, quite a lot of us have had Edgar types of people who aren't necessarily that attractive, but because they're in a position of authority, that, it's funny, the thing that gets triggered in, perfectly sensible, and it's not just women, but, I'm going to say women just because I'm one, but, perfectly sensible girls will be sort of trotting along, minding their own business, and then you have someone who's sort of all giving it the big I am, and, why is it that we're like, interesting? I mean, I think, and I've been thinking about Monica Lewinsky, actually. I've been thinking about Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton, and at the time, how me included weren't thinking about the power dynamic. And I mean, I wasn't thinking, oh, stone the slut, but I was, I think, a lot more taking the piss than now when I look at it, now as I look at it at my age now with, my son's 20. So she was only 23, I think, at the time. And when I think about that, I actually begin to understand quite how loathsome the whole thing was, because, you know, he was the president of the United States and she was a 23-year-old intern. I mean, in what world was she going to say no? And in what world was that yes one that was, for which she was truly, you know, relationships that are based on that kind of structure can flourish in the long run. But I think that realistically, most of them are, you know, borderline abusive, and they're not going to lead anywhere good. So it was something that I was interested in playing with a bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a toxic trait of mine, but I actually do really enjoy reading about those types of relationships. I find them really fascinating and really exciting, and I just get sucked into the drama of it all. And I can take a step back and go, this is wrong. Like, this is really, there's a real power play going on here. It's not right. You know, I can say all the rest of it, but ultimately I do enjoy reading those sorts of things. And as soon as I got a sense that there was some kind of affair going on, I was like, here we go, I'm in. So yeah, that's my red flag. I'm very sorry, everyone. Now, I want to ask about something that I was really interested that you explored in the book. Was you also explored this in Blood Orange as well, and you did briefly mention it before, but you explore alcoholism, and quite a few of the characters in the book have had their lives sort of impacted by it. I mean, with Lucy's father's an alcoholic. You know, I'm going to actually be careful about what I say now because I don't want to give anything away. But there's a lot of characters.
Whiskey plays quite a big part.
Yes, there's
it,
a lot of characters that have been affected by it. I just realised I was about to give something away, and I was like, "Don't do it." But like you said before about Blood Orange, and if anybody moans about this, then it's been out long enough. But Blood Orange, Alison also turns to alcohol, and I don't think that's too much of a spoiler. What kind of draws you to writing about this topic?
Well, I think that in a way, the books sort of reflect my own booze journey. Because, I mean, when I wrote Blood Orange, it was not intended in any way whatsoever to be an advertisement for drinking. I think it should be abundantly clear from that book that her use of alcohol is not good, that she's relying on it much too much, inappropriately so, and that it's causing her a huge amount of trouble. And that the point after, there's a scene where she does karaoke and she's then confronted with the evidence of that the next day, and she sort of sees herself as she has appeared to others and is just crucified by it. But I remember being interviewed about it by someone who is teetotal, who was immensely hostile towards me about it, because she said that I should have spelt out much more that A, it was alcoholism, and B, that she was going to give up drinking. Now, I mean, I personally think that that woman was talking shit, but at the same time, it did sort of lodge in my head. And I think that, you know, and certainly I was writing a lot of the shame from the anxiety and you know, that awful bit where you wake up the next day and you can't remember what you've done. That's all first-hand experience. You know, there was a long time that I was very much drinking too much. And as I think I said earlier, that I gave up drinking nearly 2 years ago. And this book, a friend of mine read it and she said, oh yes, it's Tyce, the Prohibition Years. And I hadn't necessarily intended it to be as much of an anti-alcohol message as I think it has. But I don't think that there's any, I guess right now I'm in a place where I don't see many positives to alcohol, certainly not for myself. And I think that you know, what it always comes through on the page, you know, what our own personal preoccupations are, even if not directly, indirectly, it sort of creeps its way in. And so I think that it's also such a strong factor within the criminal justice system as well. I mean, if you were to make alcohol disappear, I think you would end up with massive percentage less crime. I mean, probably 50% less at least. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't be able to, but the amount of crime that's committed as a result of alcohol is absolutely huge. You know, so whether it's violence or any of the rest of it. Also, and I think this is something I've only realised quite recently, that I mentioned earlier that I had worked on something before Cruelty, which hadn't worked. And that was a book that was meant to open in a distillery up in the north of Scotland, actually set around the same area as some of the stuff in Cruelty happens. And we had a discussion, me and the publishing team, and they said, women don't drink whiskey, we don't think. I sat there going, Oh, yes, we do. And not that I was intentionally trying to prove them wrong, but there's an awful lot of women drinking whiskey in that book. But none of it good, none of it positive. So,
No.
I mean, that is what's, without having made a conscious plan for that to be the case at all, I do feel that things just come through. You can't help but something. Actually, I'm just thinking about the fact that you're an actor, that it's when I was trying to do best characterization for my second novel, I really struggled with that because I was not thinking about the lead character as being a person. I was just thinking about her as being the anti-Alison. I wanted someone who wasn't going to be criticized as much as Alison was. And so I basically had her, sort of putting down the glass of wine after 3 sips and always being home on time for the school run and all of that. But she just was a very bland, non-existent person. And so I went off and read a bit about, is it the Stanislavski method of, so if you're going to be acting a bereaved character, you're acting someone who's lost your son, but you're hopefully in the position of never having lost someone as close to you as that, but perhaps you have lost a childhood pet, which is a devastating loss in itself. I don't mean to minimize it, but you take the smaller thing and then you expand on it to make it, you sort of think yourself into it. And I think that is sort of the way that I write. I mean, it's not method writing, but that bits of the author, certainly bits of me, cannot help but end up coming onto the page in ways that I don't intend, but I can't necessarily control.
Yeah, but I think, that I always like reading when I've read a couple of books by the same author because you get a real flavour of them as a person. And I think I've only read 2 of your books, and I definitely need to go off and read 2 and 3 now. But reading Blood Orange and reading A Lesson in Cruelty, I can totally see the similarities and I can totally see the sort of essence of you. And I think that's a really wonderful thing. I also have felt a bit annoyed since I heard what the interviewer said to you, because I don't think that you were trying to promote anything, and I don't think.
Oh, no.
And
it was a very. I mean, I think that she had an agenda that was separate from anything to do with that, but that had obviously got under her skin. And there was an author who refused to endorse it, actually, who wouldn't give a quote for it because she had found it, well, she didn't say this, but I took away from it that she'd found it triggering,
right?
Because she's someone who had stopped drinking herself sometime before. But I mean, I don't know, I was annoyed by both, if I'm honest, because I really don't think on any reading of Blood Orange that I'm saying anywhere that this is positive or a good thing to do. It's just that I'm showing, not telling. And I thought that was what we were meant to do, was show, not tell. I didn't realise that it had to come with health warnings. But I don't think anybody would get to the end of that book and say, you know what, I'm off to have 3 bottles of red wine and 3 Negronis. Thank you. I
definitely didn't feel encouraged.
Well.
No, I definitely didn't feel encouraged to go drink after that book. It was the total opposite. But I think, but like I said before, you write complex people and people are flawed. And if you're going to write somebody real, alcohol is a vice for a lot of people. So you just need to be real about that.
Huge.
Yeah.
Well, it's huge. I mean, it's so woven into our society.
Totally.
It's fascinating when you stop. I mean, I've stopped a few times. I mean, I have never before now made the decision that this is it, that I'm not drinking. I now don't drink and I won't ever drink, or, that's the plan. But I stopped for a year in 2009. And that was, I mean, for a start, I was younger. And so people thought, what on earth are you doing? But the difference between now and then in terms of the availability of but you don't just have to sit and drink Coke or lemonade. There's this huge range of choices, and it does feel as if it has become something that's a lot more socially acceptable. But even so, though, alcohol runs through everything. It's all these different flavors of how to get out your face. It's off your face. It's a very, very curious when you actually stop and look at it.
No, it really is. For our listeners, A Lesson in Cruelty is out now, and I hope that you have enjoyed reading this book this month. And if you haven't, then there is going to be a link in our show notes to go buy yourselves a copy. And I will also pop a link in the show notes for the other books that we've discussed today, including Harriet's other books. Lastly, we have to ask if you've got any recommendations for us. So what have you got, Harriet?
Well, there is going to be coming out in paperback very soon, if it hasn't already, a book by Louise Hare called Harlem After Midnight, which is a fantastic murder mystery set in Harlem back in the, I'm having a blank about, oh, sorry, Lou, I think it's about the 30s. It's pre-war. But anyway, it's great. It's really, really good. That's terrible. I read it quite a while ago. So, I don't retain information very well.
Neither do I.
But it's historical, but it's 20th century historical, and it's great fun. I'm just trying to think. The problem is, the last few months I've been down a wormhole of research for my new books. So I've been reading slightly random things, which have not been sort of necessarily that you'd read now. But I'm just trying to think what I've got lined up for myself that I'm looking forward to. I think Callie Taylor's got a new book out called, I think, Every Move You Make, and that's about stalking or being stalked, and she apparently had an experience of being stalked herself, and so
oh my gosh,
I think that's going to be a properly scary psych thriller. So yeah, those two, Louise Hare, Harlem After Midnight, and CL Taylor, I think it's Every Move You Make, but
wonderful.
It is one of the lines from the Sting song, so we can look it up and get it right.
Okay,
but I'm looking
wonderful.
forward to reading that.
I will pop those in the show notes. Thank you for those recommendations. I really want to quickly ask, and I'm so aware of time, but you just said you're working on your next book. What can you briefly tell us about that?
Well, it's a little bit Schrodinger's novel at the moment, because I have sent a lengthy outline to my editor, and I'm waiting to see if he said yes, I think, because we had quite a long chat, but a friend of mine read the synopsis and she says it's as if Hitchcock did The Crucible. So it's, if I'm allowed to do this, it's going to be about the murder trial of a girl who thinks she's a witch.
Oh my gosh.
Contemporary. But we have to see. I mean, I'm at early stages, and so I'm waiting to be given the green light. But I think I'm going to have a lot of fun with this.
That is so exciting.
I'm quite excited about that.
I'm excited about this. Thank you so much for coming on to A Pair of Bookends. It's honestly been such a joy getting to chat to you today. Where can our listeners find you on social media?
They can find me on Twitter, on X, Harriet_Tyce, and they can find me on Instagram, Harriet_Tyce. And they can find, I think it's author Harriet Tyce, or potentially Harriet Tyce author, on Facebook. I have a page, and I have a profile on TikTok, but I'm sorry, that's for the youth. I don't understand.
I will go find you on that.
I know my videos are terrible. I
so am
mine. Have the natural ability. It's just, and I end up just watching. I watch a lot of sheep shearing and llama shearing and grooming of neglected dogs. It's a total time suck. So I'm trying to keep
those
off
videos
TikTok.
make me cry. Gosh.
Yeah, but 20 minutes later, that's 20 minutes of your life you won't get back.
No. It's hard. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, no, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
It's been really lovely chatting to you. And for our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please do rate, review and subscribe, as it helps us immensely. And if you want to give us a follow, you can do so at A Pair of Bookends Pod on Instagram and at A Pair of Bookends on Twitter and TikTok. And that is all we've got time for. So again, Harriet, thank you. And goodbye.
Bye.